All right, now, settle down and gather around for your bi-weekly pitch fest. It's time for the Strings and Things podcast. On this show, musicians come by to change their guitar strings and talk about all kinds of things. After the new strings get stretched and tuned up, they get put through their paces in a special performance with our guest. This week, Brooklyn native Randolph Hudson III is here to work on a limited edition Veilette-Citron guitar, while our host, Patrick Grant, restrings a favorite Danelectro. Randy's going to tell us about the history of the EBow and where you might have heard it before, and we'll hear about trying to be an environmentally conscious guitarist when you also have a Jones for tube electronics. Let's join Randy and Patrick now and see what's up.
For this episode, as our guest, we have Randolph Hudson III, or for those who know him, work with him, and love him, simply Randy. Hey, Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Patrick.
Oh, we'll see how you feel about that when we're all done. but thanks for the word of encouragement right up front. Well, as you know, what we're going to do is we're going to change the strings on our guitars and talk about a few things. And before we do, one of the things I want to point out is I was thinking back. I've known you 16 years, I believe. New music diva and fantastic pianist Kathy Sapovi put together a group of us, Exploding Music, in 2000, so we can be part of these music conferences that were going on. And through that, I met Martha Mook and you. You were playing with Martha, the violist,
yes,
in a duet called Bowing, as in a viola bow, and as in what, Randy?
Well, an EBow, or as they say in Cuba, arco electronico.
Arco electronico. Or didn't you have another term that you turned me on to recently? It's a string...
driver.
A string driver.
That's the generic description for the type of technology that Greg Heat came up with in the early 70s.
Okay.
The EBow's been around since 1976 when it was first premiered at NAMM, Summer NAMM of 76.
So Randy is, he is in our circle of friends here, our EBow specialist, guru, doctor. He is the oracle. He's the man on top of the mountain that you go and consult all things EBow. And you may be asking yourself, what is an EBow? Where would you say that most people have heard an EBow before?
One was there was a group from Scotland which had featured EBows. The name of the band was called Big Country. They had a song that in the Big Country, it was called In the Big Country, that featured EBow.
It did emulate bagpipes in a lot of ways.
It can. It can emulate horn sounds or string sounds.
In this particular case, I'm saying, because they were from Scotland, yeah.
Yeah, they kind of tuned in or vibed into that kind of bagpipe thing. But I would say in terms of popular culture, there was a singer-songwriter named Duncan Sheik who had a song called Barely Breathing, and that pretty well featured EBow. Recently, I've been hearing it on things like Katy Perry happens to be a fan of EBow, so you'll hear it on some of her tunes.
People probably heard them in a lot of horror film soundtracks of different varieties, like you might hear a theremin or a water harp. These textural things that are easy to throw in. EBows are a part of our everyday life, is what I'm trying to say.
Everything goes great with EBows. It just adds that jus in the background, that atmospheric jus that people just really love. Many people think that it was Robert Fripp on playing EBow on Heroes.
That's what I wanted to point out. Robert Fripp did not use EBow on his elegiac solo that he plays in David Bowie's Heroes. However, most, if not every, live interpretation that's been performed after that with Adrian Belew or any other guitarist used an EBow to recreate what Robert did, as only Robert can do in the studio, not using an EBow, but they used an EBow to recreate that effect.
For all practical purposes, you needed an EBow or a sustainer. Fernandez also is a company that has marketed through the years a pickup that is kind of a stationary EBow built into the guitar that many people use, including Robert Fripp, actually uses a Fernandez sustainer in his, I think it's a ESP, or it might be even Fernandez Les Paul that he uses.
Yeah, he uses pretty much his Les Paul these days. At least in the current tour, they've been seeing a lot of his rig with the eighth incarnation of King Crimson that's been going on.
Interesting. So that solo is iconic, and yet while he didn't do it using an EBow, every person who's had to step into his shoes to recreate that song live has had to use either an EBow or some type of other sustainer to get that continuous sustain.
So to close that out, that's the homework part. If you wanted to Google David Bowie Heroes Live, you'll probably see the guitarist using an EBow. Let's talk about the guitarist we'll be working with today. You have a resplendent-looking, nicely shaped red guitar there. Tell us about it.
The color is a beautiful red aniline dye, but it happens to be one of a dozen instruments that was built by Joe Veilette and Veilette-Citron. I'm pronouncing it Joe Veilette. It's actually Joe Veilette, but when people see how it's spelled, they often say Veilette.
Because they mistake the I for an L?
Yeah. So it's Veilette. Joe and Harvey were both architectural students in Brooklyn, and they got their start building guitars together. And they had a shop in Brooklyn, and they moved up to the Kingston area around 1980. Their original guitars were very alembic. What people said they were very reminiscent of alembic. They were neck through with multiple laminations on the body. One of the noted players that used to play one of those early models was Tina Weymouth. She used to play basses. Talking Heads. Bill Nelson of Bebop Deluxe fame also used to use one of their models. So I was always enthralled with these guitars. This particular set, or the Shark baritone,
3 pickups,
was designed by John Sebastian. And actually, John mixed the aniline dye that this was.
When you say John Sebastian?
John Sebastian of the Lovin' Spoonful.
Really? Okay.
Well, he happened to be a neighbor. So
and for you younger kids, the guy who sings the song for Welcome Back, Kotter.
Welcome Back, Kotter.
But yeah, but Lovin' Spoonful, John. Okay, so that was him. Okay.
So John was a neighbor. This particular guitar, Joe happened to sell me 3 years ago. And this was his personal guitar. This is the one he made first. And because they were up in Woodstock, there was a club there called the Joyous Lake. And this guitar would sit in the Joyous Lake. So this guitar ended up being played by Jorma Kaukonen. He ordered one. James Taylor walked in. He ordered one. Earl Slick came in. He ordered one. Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones came in. He ordered one. They only made a dozen. They're very rare. It's kind of an amazing instrument.
It's a baritone.
It is a baritone guitar.
For people who don't know, what makes it a baritone?
Baritones are interesting. They're tuned either a fifth or a fourth lower. So they're between a guitar and the bass guitar.
And as far as I recall, they're also known for playing a lot of the emblematic solo guitar parts, a lot of the Morricone.
They're most associated with either spaghetti western, surf, a lot of iconic solos. They were also used in lieu of a tic-tac bass or six-string bass, things like the Wichita Lineman. Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum. You hear that line. That's definitely... it's baritone.
And it was because you said you'd be bringing that I decided I would bring out a Danelectro, one of the...
beautiful color.
I think it's the U52 series. But I brought a Danelectro guitar because they're also famous for their baritone series. A Danelectro has a soft spot in my heart because it represents my return to guitar in later years. Because I had become, as of about 10 years ago, well known as a keyboard guy, lots of electronic synthesizer guy. But I started out as a kid, playing guitar. I was down in Brazil, and I said, I need a guitar for my rig, because I wanted that sound. I started incorporating a lot more guitar. And then one of the guys down there, named Guga, down in Brazil, they lent me one. I just fell in love with it, because it was cheap, and I had never played a cheap guitar I love so much, because it doesn't try to be anything it's not. It's very happy that it's made from Formica and Masonite, and doesn't try to pretend that it's made from anything else. The cheap guitars that try to be cheaper versions of an SG or a Stratocaster. They keep the same design, they just use cheaper materials, and they don't work.
actually going to do the brave thing of actually trying a different brand.
Do the brave thing.
Yeah, these are Kurt Mangan's.
So here we are, deep in the process of changing our strings. Well, not deep, but just commencing. How's it going so far?
It's going.
So far, so good. Randy, tell us about your background for our listeners. Where were you born?
Born in Brooklyn.
What's your musical story then? What bands have you played in?
Born in Brooklyn, but I moved to Holbrook, Lake Ronkonkoma when I was 6. And that's where I grew up. And we refer to it as like Lake Ronkonkoma as a glacial armpit. And a cultural one is at that too. So in high school, I played in bands. I started playing when I was 13 years old in 1970. And my cousin Dennis was in the Marines, and he came back from Vietnam, and he had electric guitars. And I loved my cousin, and I loved my cousin's electric guitars, and he gave me an electric
Which did
guitar.
you love more?
Well, I loved him, but I loved the fact that he gave me his electric guitar.
Which guitar was that?
It was an Encore. It was like a Japanese brand. It was hacked apart very quickly in high school as I was trying to evolve the guitar into some other kind of thing. It looked like an SG type of guitar.
Okay,
three pickup type of thing.
That was my next question. What type? Because they're usually like one of 4 types that all these knockoffs are based upon.
SG, for the listener, the SG guitar is the devil horn guitar. It looks like it has the 2 devil horns. So
there you go.
My cousin also gave me a stack of records. So they were Santana, Hendrix, Cream, Eric Clapton. So those were the kinds of things that I first heard, blues players that I kind of heard that really kind of got me interested in guitar. I quickly started playing in bands in high school, and we were doing Mountain, the Allman Brothers, Hendrix, all that kind of stuff, Deep Purple, those kinds of bands.
Right.
And then very quickly...
Nazareth?
No Nazareth.
Uriah Heep?
No, well, Uriah Heep was cool, but, we very quickly, though, myself and several other players, including a keyboard player at the time named Mark Kramer, who later came to New York with me in a band. But we were playing Yes and King Crimson and Genesis, and then very quickly moved into fusion music, Mahavishnu Orchestra, things like that. Great way to learn your modes, your time signatures, everything else. You had to really know music and kind of study music in order to actually play that stuff. I go to Berkeley to study arranging and composing. Mark Kramer goes to the Creative Music Studio up in Woodstock. He leaves and comes to New York, gets involved with Giorgio Gomelsky and Zoo Space. So we become the house band along with a band called Zoo, which then became Material, that featured Bill Laswell and Michael Beinhorn, Fred Mayer, those guys. But we had a band called the Holy Sheets in New York. And the Holy Sheets, we were getting like picks, we were getting picked over bands like Tom Petty and stuff like that. We were basically a large band. We were a 10-piece, kind of like they called us the White Art Ensemble of Chicago. Mm-hmm. Giorgio loved the band, and the band had a real interesting sound. As time went on, Kramer went on to other things. I went on to other things, and I ended up playing with David Hild and Ralph Carney. David had been working with David Thomas of Per Ubu. David Hild had come from a band called The Girls up in Boston. So that was a band called Midget Planet that featured Mark Ribot, Greg Cohen, David Licht. I ended up meeting up with Kramer again. He asked me to take the guitar position in a band called Bongwater. And that's what most people kind of remember. Even the downtown scene, though, in the late 70s, early when we got there, we were also playing with John Zorn, Kobe Batty. We backed up the Fugs. We were the original Fugs band that kind of came back together again in 1980. But in 1990, Kramer asked me to become part of Bongwater, and we toured Europe. We did an album, recording at the BBC, a Peel session. Came back from that, did an album here, and then the band summarily broke up. Ann got signed to Geffen. I did a record with Ann on Geffen, and then called The Love Show. And then Kramer also did 2 solo records, one called The Guilt Trip and The Secret of Comedy. We also had a short-lived band with Penduletta Penn and Teller called Captain Howdy. For those that are Linda Blair fans, Captain Howdy is the imaginary playmate in The Exorcist. So that was a very interesting band. in the mid '90s, I met Martha Mook. We started doing this duo called Boeing.
What's your take on how things are different now as opposed to the way they were then in terms of playing in New York?
Well, first off, music is now spread out, and Manhattan was actually the epicenter of music. It's now really Brooklyn, maybe some of the other boroughs, even Queens and things like that. But Manhattan was the place, especially all kinds of odd areas in the Meatpacking District, in the Lower East Side. You had places like the Knitting Factory, which had just started, and other performance spaces. There was a space right off McDougal Street, underneath what was called Exotic Aquatics. It was a kind of like a pet, like an exotic pet store.
Exotic Aquatics.
And we used to do these gigs with with John Zorn there, Eugene Chadbourne. We did a gig with Lindsay Cooper from Henry Cow that was there. Fred Frith and I did duos.
Fred Frith from the Canterbury School of Prog Rock.
Canterbury School of Prog Rock. He's just an amazing, guitar solos. That first guitar solos record he did was just mind-blowing. I turned a lot of people on. I just used to buy that record and hand it to them. Mm-hmm. This will change your life. And many people still thank me for it. There were a lot of joints rolled on the cover of that old LP. It had other purposes besides that.
Younger folks might have to Google what is an album cover. And the many uses.
Vinyl's back.
I guess
5% of the market now.
Is it really back to 5%?
5%. Shocking, right?
Someone gave me a celebrity compass. It's just like a regular compass, but instead of pointing north, it points in the direction of the nearest celebrity. A friend and I use it to find our way to a Zeppelin party.
I understand your cousin and his role, but I want to ask you, is there any one particular piece of music you remember that just really hit you hard when you were very young and impressionable?
One of the first records my cousin gave me was Axis, Bold as Love.
Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, and I happened to listen to that one before I actually listened to Are You Experienced. Both records were in that stack that he gave me, about 25 records. The title track, the fact that it was the title track, even though I listened all the way through, I was listening with the anticipation of hearing, well, what's this song called, Axis, Bold as Love? Hearing how it was put together from a compositional performance standpoint, and how it started just so brashly, anger, just this kind of, gesture of starting the song. It didn't count off. It didn't do anything. And how it built, and how not only did it build, but it probably has two of the greatest guitar solos in it. Two guitar solos, not just a guitar solo, but two guitar solos. It kind of starts, it has the solo, and then it ends, false ending, and then it comes back. It kind of really put into my mind or perception of how to judge other material. I was using that kind of as well, here's how this song goes, and immediately starting to determine, form. Here's an intro, here's your verse, here's your chorus, here's your solo, that kind of thing, and sort of taking it how it goes. But Jimmy was just so. That particular song was pretty mind-blowing for a 13-year-old kid.
Yeah. So how the strings going?
They're going great.
If I'm not going as fast as I usually go, but I think a lot of that's because there's a cheap little bridge at the end of this Danelectro, keeping the costs down, of course, But it does make, changing strings a little more difficult. Your string wants to pop out right away. So for those of you who can't see, I'm actually using a capo to hold down my string so it doesn't pop out of the bridge while I wind it around the peg.
You're winding it around?
Yeah, well.
does seem like we're about to run out of fish. I'm a vegan for the most part, but I do eat fish, and I don't want to have to say, sorry, Charlie, you were the last tuna in the ocean, you know. But it seems like we're getting there, you know. Japan has started a whole pre-cooking fish program with, let's roast them right in the ocean before you even eat them.
Doesn't Fukushima take care of that?
Yeah, that's the Fukushima, side benefit. Let's take a look. Maybe it's already pre-cooked. No need.
No,
don't microwave it. Just...
Seriously, what are you talking about?
No, that's the Fukushima effect.
Okay. So you mean I was right? Okay.
Yeah, you were right. You're completely right.
I was being funny. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on the same wavelength. That's good.
It's an interesting time we live in because we're an evolved society. Things are changing. Just what's happened in the time that I've been born is pretty interesting to kind of observe in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's hard as a guitarist. I do care about the environment, but honestly, I care about vacuum tubes more. I'm not about to say, oh, stop all vacuum tube production. I'm sorry, because it pollutes. I will want to have options of getting EL84s and 6L6s and, octal preamp tubes and everything I can get my hands on because I love the sound of tube amps. So there are some who say, it's too bad. There's enough stock. Not enough for me. Sorry. Not enough for me. And it's interesting too. I mean, batteries are really hopefully solving some of the problems in the world. I mean, that's really one of the keys. Battery technology, if they can really improve it, will really help society in general, as well as helping musicians as well. But speaking as somebody whose life has been in search of 9-volt batteries, and we used to joke. It's like, before there were these pedal adapters that would, the early days of pedals were always like terrible. Like you'd get noise and you'd get all kinds of things, and if you could run it off a battery, you did, because it really helped sonically. But in the process, helping to fill landfills up with batteries is not the greatest thing. But, I used to always think about how much of my paycheck went to batteries back in the day.
Really?
Oh, yeah, there's a paycheck. There was definitely a battery quotient in the paycheck. You had a big pedal board, 10 pedals. That was 10 9-volts you had to have every week. That was,
that is a big chunk. It is worth mentioning that Randy is the founder of the EBow Quartet.
I co-founded it with Conrad Sparneroff, who lives in Staten Island, Doug Principato. Michelle Temple from Per Ubu is also a member. I co-founded a Bob Dylan tribute band called The Complete Unknowns. We're, for the last 4 years, been the house band of B.B. King's in New York City.
The Complete Unknowns. Never heard of them.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. I also play with Cliff Black and John Sparrow in a band called Black and Sparrow, and we did an album called Second Time Around where I play baritones and baritone 12 strings and 12-string guitar on a couple of tunes, but mainly baritone guitar and baritone 12 strings.
We should tell our listeners too that it's, at least from my perspective, you're sort of divided between two scenes. Like, even though you have your born and have a foothold in Brooklyn, spend a lot of your time out on the East End,
yes,
in East Hampton, and part of something that I see called the East End Opry.
Yes, the East
Tell
End.
us, what is the East End Opry?
The East End Opry is really a vehicle for original music, singer-songwriters and composers, instrumental composers as well. And it's over 300 people who are part of it, and we produce original music events on a regular basis in the Hamptons area.
Well, I'd love to be part of that this summer. Thank you.
It'd be fantastic. Of course,
Yes.
We have to. I mean, Tilted Axis has to come to the Hamptons. It's a must.
We're ready. We're ready.
It's a must.
Great. So, if anybody wants to find out more about you and your activities, is there any place on the internet that they should go to in particular?
Well, if you go to Facebook and it's Randolph Hudson, you'll find a lot of it.
Randolph
A
Hudson.
lot of it there. I do have a website, even though you'll be surprised what you see at that website if you go. It's rah3.com.
Because you are
Randolph A. Hudson III. So it's raw3.
Ra3.
Raw3.
Like rah, rah, rah.
And that's an evolving site, but what's there right now is a pretty interesting little bit of stuff. So if you're,
Now I'm
if you're
curious.
if you're so inclined, you'll see. I work a lot with Cynthia Daniels, who's a multi-Grammy award-winning engineer-producer out in East Hampton. She has a wonderful studio called Monk Music. And I'm there quite often and recording a lot, and we've done a ton of projects there. So I'm very lucky to be recording all the time, and I kind of get away with murder. I'm like I'm the experimental guy out there. So
Oh, yeah.
it's a lot of guitar synths and Roland VG work, EBow work, of course, and all the various guitars, fretless guitars and things like that I've got. So.
Well, I do have a stack of mini Moogs. I'm just dying to use on our project.
Oh, please, you're welcome. At any particular
Okay,
time.
we'll talk about
You're
that
welcome.
when we get away from our strings and things.
Yeah.
And have you brought us a piece that we can play through today now that our strings hopefully are stretched and ready to sing?
Phlogiston, spelled Phlogiston.
Phlogiston.
Phlogiston is the name of the piece. And for those listeners who like arcane information,
People like arcane information would be never listening to a podcast like this.
phlogiston is the magical ether that made everything work.
When you mean ether, you mean like
If a wheel
the fabric of the cosmos.
Yes,
Before
it-
they understood space-time.
Before they understood physics and how things really worked, they imagined that there was some magical force that was somehow providing the energy behind something. So in a ship, if the wind filled the sail, the wind was there, but it wasn't the wind itself that was providing the power. It was the phlogiston.
That's a great word. That's the word of the day, man. So this is a piece called Phlogiston. Shall we amp up and see what it sounds like?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, here we go. Thanks, Randy. Very cool.
Thank you for having me here.
And thanks for bringing over your red baritone.
Anytime.
Sounding great.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us. Our guest has been Randolph Hudson III, and you can find out more about him on our website at stringsandthingsshow.com. The music in this show is from the EBow Quartet, Bongwater, and Bowing. Special thanks to Vox Amps USA, D'Addario Strings, and Electro Harmonics New York City. I'm Jocelyn Gonzalez on the Zeros and Ones, and Patrick Grant is our host and axe wrangler. Strings and Things is a Peppergreen production for Headstepper Media. See you next time.